Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Ibrahim, and I want to welcome you tonight. I am the Educational Director for the Agape Project. First, I want to thank the Lord our God and the grace of the Holy Spirit for guiding us and bringing us together tonight. I would also like to thank Abuna Samuel and Abuna Mark, who have been working besides us on this journey since the beginning, and for their continued support and prayers. In addition, I would like to thank all of our regional fathers for their continued love, support, and prayers. And lastly, but most importantly, I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for our launch event. We are very excited, honored, and very humbled by the amount of people we have here today and the amount of interest and support that we have received since going public only 10 days ago is very overwhelming. The Agape Project is composed of servants from the region of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and we initially began this endeavor to serve our local community. However, we're very thankful tonight to let you know that we have people from many states across America, including but not limited to California, Florida, Wisconsin, Illinois, Nebraska, Texas, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and there are people from Canada here. So that's very exciting. I want to introduce you first to our team. So I will begin by introducing our loving fathers, Abuna Samuel Hanna and Abuna Mark Cherubim. Abuna Samuel serves as a priest at St. Mark Coptic Orthodox Church in Natick. He is also serving a term as the chancellor for the New England region for the Diocese of New York and New England. He has a doctoral degree in pharmacy and his master's in theological studies. Second, we have Abuna Mark Cherubim. Abuna Mark also serves as a priest of St. Mark's in Natick, and he is a licensed independent clinical social worker. Prior to answering the call of priesthood, Abuna Mark spent 15 years working in the field of mental health counseling, specializing in family and couples therapy. Next, we have our speaker for this evening, Mary Mesiha. Mary is a licensed independent clinical social worker with experience in child protection, adoption, foster care, and teletherapy private practice. Furthermore, she's been very active in parent education in her home church, also in Natick, Massachusetts. Now, in addition to Mary, we have a number of very dedicated and passionate mental health professionals on our team. With us tonight, we have first Anne Al-Shama. Anne is a licensed independent clinical social worker with 19 years of experience working with children and families, providing individual, child, and family therapy. She's been trained to provide trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy for adolescents and provides and consults for the family and probate courts as a guardian ad litem, custody evaluator, and mediator. Justina Sadallah is a licensed independent clinical social worker who has extensive experience working with children and families and has been working with the Child Protection Program and Foster Care Clinic for the past 5 years. Monica Mawad has received her master's degree in mental health counseling and practices as a clinical mental health therapist, specifically working with children who suffer from trauma. And as many of you already know, the Agape Project is a multidisciplinary team, which means we have other professionals on our team who do other types of jobs, and they inform some of the work that we do. First, we have Angelina Awad. Angelina Awad is a cognitive neuroscience research assistant with experience working with vulnerable mental health populations. She also serves to empower young Coptic women. Meenam Sihat is an orthopedic surgeon, a subdeacon in the New York, New England Diocese, and a perennial advocate for the empowerment of all members of our community. He's also the proud husband of our presenter, Mary Mesiha, and the father of Jacob, Sophia, and Luca. Hiba Fanous is a well-renowned physician and urology cancer researcher who has served on parent-teacher associations, special education advisory boards, and medical outreach programs in Egypt. Martina Mehta is a licensed attorney who has experience in child advocacy law, immigration law, and public policy and legislation. Sarah Joe is a licensed educator who has years of experience working with vulnerable and underserved populations in the public school system. She is an elementary school teacher in Lowell, Massachusetts with a master's degree in education. And least important, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Maggie Ibrahim, and as I said before, I am the Educational Director for the Agape Project. I am a high school English teacher with a master's degree in English literature and secondary education with a concentration on curriculum design and education as a means for social activism. I want to get to the topic for tonight's discussion. So many of you are aware that incidences of sexual assault in the Coptic Church have recently come to light. With more people coming forward with their stories, we have come together to form the Agape Project to help educate people on these matters. We believe that education can be a powerful tool and the best, most effective preventative measure. So here at the Agape Project, we envision a Christ-centered Coptic Orthodox Church community that empowers every congregant to advocate for equality and combat abuse in all its forms. We believe that the church must be an open, transparent, and safe environment that is filled with love, support, and trust between the clergy, the servants, and the laity. While some have claimed that directing attention to these events hurts the church and its reputation, we believe that our vision pushes away the sins of the world and reveals the church for what it really is. It is a safe haven. It is a place of love. It is a place of healing, compassion, and unity. We invite you all to join us tonight for our launch, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. There will be a Q&A after the lecture, and I just want to confirm, do we have the form or will we be submitting over chat?
We do not have the chat enabled, unfortunately. So when we get to the Q&A session, we can give additional instructions.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you, Angelina. So I just want to let you all know, if we will try to get to everyone's question tonight. If we do not get to your question, that means that we're going to be saving it for a subsequent meeting, because we're going to try to prioritize all of the questions that are relevant to tonight's specific topic and specific audience. All right. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Agape Project's first installment of our educational series on safety, the servant's role against sexual abuse. Tonight's presenter, the extraordinary Mary Mesiha, licensed independent clinical social worker, will be speaking about the servant's role and how to keep our children safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some faces from far away. So thank you very much. Hold on, we're just fixing something here.
Making it so you can see more people.
Thank you. So like Maggie said, tonight's topic is the servant's role in keeping children safe. Let me just get the slideshow going. All right, so, I mean, just like in any, if you've attended any talk like this, the first thing I have to do is just let you know that this is sensitive material. It may be hard for some of you to hear. That's okay, it's totally normal. If it's difficult and you need to step away, go ahead. If you want to keep your camera off this whole time, totally fine. I think that we are going to be recording. So if you're not comfortable having your camera open, you feel free to turn it off. So just so you all know, we're recording tonight. If you need to reach out to us afterwards, please do. You know, we can connect you with someone to talk to. If you have your own mental health provider, feel free to reach out to them. Some of this stuff can be kind of triggering. So okay. So first, I want to thank you all for being here and attending. And I have to say, I'm so happy. Tonight when we were praying with our kids, I thanked God that there were so many people that cared about keeping children safe. So just by the virtue of you being here is taking a step in the right direction. And I want to thank you all. I think all of you filled out the Google form for your responses. A lot of you asked for information on how to educate yourself and help keep our children safe, which is exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. Some of you asked tonight's talk is more for servants. There's other talks, if you go to our website, There's talks for parents specifically. There's talks for college and graduates. So there's more specific talks, separate talks for parents in upcoming weeks. And some of you who are servants asked for, well, we're all servants, asked for, talks specific to curriculum for children. Like, how do I talk to a 5th grader about this? Or what do I tell this 2nd grader? So after our first, what we're doing first is talking to the adults, the servants, the parents, the congregation, and then we're rolling out the curriculum to the children. So that is upcoming. So keep an eye out for that. So we're not going to talk, we will talk a little bit about how to talk to kids, but not very specific to specific age groups. So this is the first talk in our series in safety. We have several other units that, God willing, will be rolled out in the future, such as, we have units labeled healthy sexuality, biology and anatomy, cultural bias, self-esteem, other things. So if you're looking for information that you don't hear tonight, let us know. We'll either make sure that it's addressed in the future, or we can try and send you information about it. So what we're talking about today is protecting our Sunday school kids to the best of our ability by making proactive choices. Any step we take to protect our children means taking personal risk. And maybe that's something you've never done before, and that's okay. Like, it can feel really scary or risky for some of us, and I totally get it. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's the best thing to do for our kids. We may fear uncertainty, but these are things we have to do to the best of our ability to keep our kids safe. And as servants, we can all support each other. Look at how many people are on this call. We can all support each other. We're taking a step in the right direction. But don't let it stop here. Like Abuna said in his wonderful prayer, like, take this information that you learn here and use it in your service, pass it along to others, use it in your life. It's not just a church talk, it's very generalizable. And I also want to say that no one is expecting you to walk away from here being an expert. Learning this is a process, even for me. So we're all learning. So if you have questions or need support, please reach out. Okay, so we're going to start. What you see on the screen is our basic outline for tonight. So we're going to talk about the 5 steps to keeping your children safe. And I want to say that a part of this lesson was taken from a training called Stewards for Children. It's by an organization called Darkness to Light. So look them up, they're pretty awesome. So I want to give the credit. So part of it was taken from them, and part of it was taken from other research and other sources. Okay, so the first step is learning the facts. So to understand what we're talking about, we need to learn the facts. We need to know what child sex abuse is. And like I said at the beginning, I just want to say for this slide specifically, I'm going to be extremely clear in defining sexual abuse. And I'm going to use some terms that might make people uncomfortable. So I just want to say that. So what is child sex abuse? So child sex abuse takes many forms. It's not just sex. It includes touching and non-touching behaviors. So any kind of sex, vaginal, oral, or anal, between an adult and a child is sexual abuse. Any kind of sexual touching, whether it's over clothes or under clothes, is sexual abuse. A man or a woman can be a sexual perpetrator. It's not just men. I think women make up, I want to say 8 to 10%, but don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. So it's not just men, it's men and women. This is regardless of whether there is deception or if the child understands the sexual nature of the activity. A child can never consent to sexual activity. I want to make sure this is clear. A child may say the word yes, but they are never consenting. So they are never able to consent. Child sexual abuse is not just physical, it also includes non-contact acts, such as exhibition, which means when an adult exposes themselves to a child, child pornography, or forcing a child to watch pornography, or an abuser forcing a child to watch them masturbate. And I know this is really tough stuff to hear, but we need to know what we're talking about. So, and child pornography is always considered sex abuse under US law. The other part of child sex abuse is sexual contact between an older and a younger child, and that kind of depends on the age difference, development, and size. And it also includes sex trafficking, which can be a whole other talk in and of itself. So let's talk about some statistics to understand the magnitude of the problem. Sexual abuse thrives in secrecy and denial and fear. So we need to understand how big this problem is. And I don't know if everybody knows how big it is. Child sex abuse happens by adults to children when they exert power over another. It happens across all cultures, all races, all genders, all socioeconomic status. Basically, there's no immune, like, we're Egyptian, we're immune, we're this, we're immune, we're Christian. There's nobody that's immune, which we've sadly learned. Children have carried the weight of sexual abuse by themselves for far too long, and this needs to change. So the first kind of group of statistics we were going to talk about is the prevalence of child abuse. So it's far more prevalent. So let's talk about that. So 1 out of every 10 children will be sexually abused by their 18th birthday. And it comes out to about 1 in every 7 girls and 1 in every 25 girls, because it's more common with girls than boys. So I want to pause. I don't want to just gloss over this statistic, because right now, I don't know how many people we have on this call. Let's say 200. We're a community, we're people that have big groups of friends. We have big families. So you may think that you don't know anybody who has been traumatized as a child, but I can say with near certainty, I can't say for sure, but I will say with near certainty that you do, just by the basis of these statistics. So just pause at that and think about that. 60% of child sex abuse victims will never tell anybody about it, and we'll talk about the reasons why in the upcoming slides. About 35% of victims are 11 years or younger. That's a significant number. And the reason for this is younger kids are unable to fend for themselves. They're sometimes not as vocal. They don't really know how to escape abuse, and all the more reasons to have talks like this. The average age for reported abuse is 9 years old. Some statistics about those who perpetrate. So growing up, I don't know about you guys, my mom was supposed to be on the call, and she's on the call right now, but I mean, in school, we had program after program of stranger danger. Don't take candy from the stranger. Don't get in the car with a stranger. And my parents were the same thing. Don't talk to strangers. And then, I don't blame them. Like that's what that generation knew at that time. And it's all true, but it was all that focus on strangers is completely misguided. In as many as 93% of child sex abuse cases, the child is abused by someone that they know, someone that they're close to, someone that they trust, that their family trusts, and that trusted people in their community. 30% of children who are abused by family members. So, family unit or aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. 60% are abused by people their family trusts. And not everybody who abuses a child is a pedophile. Child abuse is perpetrated by a wide range of individuals with varying motivations. And then finally, some situational statistics. So how does it happen, or where does it happen? 81% of child sex abuse occurs when there's one adult alone with one child. And we'll talk more about this later when we talk about protective things. And most sexual abuse of a child occurs in a residence or a home, that of the child or that of the abuser. So again, no stranger danger, that happens, but it's so rare. It's more, people we know in homes of, our home or their home. So it's very different than at least what I learned when I was younger. And I know that these statistics can be tough and are frightening, and the topic is tough, but unfortunately it's a common problem. And as we heard, I just want to reiterate, the person who sexually abuses a child is more often than not an adult known to the victim, and sometimes an authority figure that they love or trust. For the most part, they don't use physical force. Another thing that I think is a misconception, they use coercion, they use manipulation to engage the child. Some argue, and I actually totally agree with this, that sexual abuse is a preventable public health problem. There's some sources out there that say child sex abuse is the #1 public health problem, and I agree that it's preventable. It's not inevitable. Its causes are not mysterious. There's a lot of things that we can do to protect children. All right, so let's talk about this. Why don't children tell when they have been abused? And I think this topic maybe has come up recently. And it's a question that's asked often. You know, why didn't they say anything? Why did they wait so long? If they were being hurt, why didn't they tell their mom, their dad? Or maybe if you know of someone in your family unit that unfortunately went through this, you might think like, you know, I was a good sister, I was a good brother, I was a good friend. Why didn't they talk to me? Why did they wait so long? This is a really good question, and I hope to kind of shed some light on it here. There's no one answer. There's many reasons. So some children won't report because they blame themselves. Sometimes the abuser will tell them it's your fault, so they're afraid. A common tactic among abusers is to use fear and threats to instill fear in them. So they think something bad might happen to their parents, to their siblings, to their friends, even their pets I've heard about. So that fear is a big thing. Shame is also a big reason. Sometimes the shame and blame continues into adulthood, and that's why sometimes adults are adults and they don't even disclose, or they take years to disclose because of this shame and this blame. Some kids don't know how to tell or who to tell. Another thing we'll talk about a little later. Who to tell, they have no safe adult to turn to. So if they don't have an identified safe adult to turn to, who are they going to tell? And how to tell if they don't have the basic knowledge or the basic body safety principles or the language of their body parts, that can be an issue. So if they were never told no one's allowed to touch your body, you know, things like that, this can be an issue for them. Many abusers use grooming tactics, and some of you may know what this is, but for those of you who don't, I'm going to explain what it is. And it's really important to understand what it is because many, I don't know the percentage, but many abusers use this tactic. Grooming is the process of earning the child and the parent's trust and compliance. It makes it less likely that a child will disclose because the abuser has gained their trust, sadly. It's a process by any means used by the perpetrator to get the parent and the child to trust them. And they do this by sometimes making the parent feel like they're in debt to them. You know, like, what do I mean by this? Like, they will babysit, they will tutor, they'll befriend the parents, they'll pay for special activities, they'll just do things to help the parents to get on their good side, all in an effort to lower parents' defenses. Grooming children can take on many different forms. Sometimes they'll find out what a child likes and lure them with gifts, or try to lure them into like isolated areas, like, come into the car with me, come on this trip with me, with things that they know that they like. So, you know, I know you like puzzles, I have a puzzle for you, come play with me, something like that. Children are so vulnerable, and any bit of personal knowledge about them can be used as a devastating weapon for a child. So this is not a parent talk, but like I said, I'm a parent, so I have to say that this is another reason not to share information about your children online. If you post about your child, just be really careful with that, because that personal knowledge can be very dangerous for kids. Also in the grooming process, the abuser will test boundaries. So they might start with, you know, a pat on the back or a hug, and then maybe a hug that will last longer. And they'll slowly increase their infringement on boundaries to see if the child or an adult will stop them. So going back to the reasons why children won't tell, sometimes the abusive adult will convince them that they won't be believed, or that they're somehow responsible for the abuse and they'll be punished for it. And kids are kids, like, they don't want to be punished. And if someone says, oh, they're not going to believe you, you believe the adult. You know, if a family member is the one who is perpetrating them, they might care about that family member or feel protective of them, which makes it really hard and makes it feel like they be betraying this person by telling about the abuse. And the abuser might use that information to keep the secret. Sexual predators are really good manipulators and will often instruct kids to keep the abuse a secret. And that's something we're going to talk about later, the issue of secrets. And it's used frequently, especially with younger kids. What else? You know, the abuser is often manipulative and will try to confuse the child about what's right and what's wrong, or tell them that the abuse is a game. Sometimes kids are just too young to understand. And finally, sometimes kids may be confused when if they experience kind of like a positive physical pleasure, arousal, or emotional intimacy from the abuse. It causes confusion for them. This feels good, but it's bad. Is it bad? It feels good. So it can be really confusing for kids. So there's many reasons why children don't tell. The effects of child abuse, I won't get too far into this because this I think could be its own talk. It varies between children. Children react differently depending on their age, the extent of the abuse, and their relationship with the offender. So it really depends. Children in general, children who have been sexually abused are at a greater risk for a lot of different psychological, emotional, and physical problems like substance abuse, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. But I want to say this, the lives of children and adults who have been sexually abused are forever changed. I wish I could sugarcoat it and say that it's not, but I can't, unfortunately. But many children and adults have healed from childhood sexual abuse and are living wonderful, productive, caring lives. Therapy can be very effective. There's many things that can help them. So I just want to, we're talking about the effects, but there is hope. They can recover, they can heal, no matter how many years have passed. So maybe there's someone on this call that has experienced this and it's been years and they think, what can I do? There's always hope. All right, so the next point, so we're at the second point, which is minimizing opportunity. So one of the most important, again, this is a servant's talk. So one of the most important things we can do as servants is to do our best to minimize the opportunity for sexual abuse to happen. A safe environment can really help reduce the risk of abuse. So I have some suggestions, and I just want you to keep an open mind hearing this. Some of these may mean that you do things completely different from what you all are used to doing. And we're from a lot of different churches here. So everybody's, layout of Sunday school is different. Everybody's format of retreats is different. So just kind of, keep an open mind when hearing this. Maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't, but I urge you not to say, well, we can't do that. Try to think outside the box when you hear some of these suggestions. And it's not to say that the way we used to do things is bad and this is good. It's just different. We're just trying to rethink our environment with the lens of child safety. So again, we all come from different churches. So I think it'd be helpful perhaps after this talk to meet with your church leaders or your servant leaders and see what works in your church. The first thing you have to do is eliminate, reduce, and fill the gaps that allows offenders access to children. So all it takes is one time, really. So how can we do this? So some ideas. In Sunday school and retreats, there should always be 2 or more adults supervising children, never one-on-one. Like we heard in that statistic, it's 80-something% of the time it's one-on-one. So never have one adult alone with a child, if at all possible. And this includes visitations and even virtual visitations, because as we heard, sexual abuse is not just physical, it can happen online. So even virtual visitations. Scan your environment. And actually, it seems kind of funny talking about this with COVID because we're not really very much in our church, but we will at some point. So scan your physical environment for hidden or secluded danger spots and make any necessary changes. So is there like a spot under the stairs where someone can hide? Is there a closet that is, that someone can go into? Look for the hot spots. Is there a spot where an abuser can lure a child away? If there are closets that can be locked by one person so that nobody can enter, just think about those hot spots. Make sure they can either be monitored or, done away with. Classrooms should have windows to see in. And if they don't, doors should remain open or at least partially open. And again, I know this is hard. I've taught all ages of Sunday school, and I think it was 5th grade specifically that's really, really loud. So it's hard to have the door open. And maybe if you have several servants in there with kids, that's not necessary. But if, you're short on servants one day, which we often are in our churches, and there's one servant in there, consider making it a rule that the door has to stay open. Make sure that interactions can be observed and interrupted. If you're like a servant leader, make it a point to drop in on Sunday school or, you know, events from time to time, just to know what's going on. If you are having outings, make sure they're somewhere public if possible, that they're observable. Try to anticipate situational risks. So, you know, no closed doors, be careful of buses. There's a lot of spots on buses that are out of line of sight. If your church has a gym, for example, be careful of the locker room. That's another hot spot. If you're serving younger children who need help in the bathroom, it should never be one adult and one child in the bathroom alone. And again, I know this may be different than what we're used to, but this is all for the sake of safety and the sake of protecting our kids. And finally, be creative and think on your feet. It's impossible for me or anyone else for that matter to predict every possible scenario. And I get that creating safe spaces is a lot of work, but I think it's worth the effort, definitely. So the second point, understand how your church's policy ensures that people are serving children are safe. So what that means is that, you know, what the Agape Project is recommending is that you interview and use background checks for those servants who will have any potentially unmonitored time with children. So not just Sunday school servants, but the person who drives the kids or drives the church van or chaperones retreats, or if you've got a kitchen crew that spends time alone with the kids, or hymns teachers, anyone that could potentially be alone with the kid. So what the Agape Project is recommending is a background check of current and future servants. If you haven't been doing this already in your church, it might be really hard to think about. I get it, but I mean, we think it's the right thing to do. Most organizations run a criminal background check on their volunteers and employees. I mean, a lot of you, if you volunteer in your kid's school or if you've started a new job, they'll often, you know, check out your background before you begin volunteering or, you know, working with children. So we're saying, let's do the same thing. Like, it just makes sense. For future servants, what we have put together and we can, you know, see about, we're happy to share, is just a simple Google form. You can make your own where you ask for people's basic demographic information, you know, find out what churches they previously served at and what services they've done in the past. And then what we're recommending is to get for new servants, to get a letter from their father confession saying this person is safe to work with children. I mean, obviously, if they're from your church and they've been there for at least a year, that's probably not necessary. So I can't really talk about Massachusetts specifically because we have people from all over. So I just want to say, check with your locality to know what the process is. Like Massachusetts we already have the setup so that we have a representative, a Corey, which is a criminal background representative who can run background checks on individuals. So you have to know how it works for your state and if there's a fee and all that stuff. So check with your state. The other thing we're strongly recommending is that each servant, again, current and future, is checked through the sex offender registry. It's a free nationwide search. It's available online in the United States. It's simple. You don't have to pay for it. You just put their name in and then you find out. So I did do a little research into Canada, and unfortunately in Canada, it doesn't seem that the public can access this. This is all the more reason to run a criminal background check if you're able to. Either way, just check with the laws in your area. All right. The next point is talk about it, which is so important. So we're going to be talking about the underwear rule. So talking about it in general breaks down barriers and reduces stigma, which is what we all really want to do. By talking openly, we can encourage children to trust and to share. So the underwear rule has 3 important points. You know, your body's your own, safe touch versus unsafe touch, and safe secrets versus unsafe secrets. It's a simple rule that a child should not be touched by others on the part of their body that's usually covered by their underwear. It's easy to explain to kids. And some people will say bathing suit for a girl, that works too. You know, that they shouldn't be touching that area and they shouldn't touch people in that area. So let's talk about the first one. So the first one is your body is your own. So we should teach children that their body belongs to them. No one can touch you without your permission. And the exception to this are mom, dad, and the pediatrician. And when a child goes to the pediatrician, for those of you who don't have kids, they will say, or they should say, you know, now I'm going to check your private parts. Remember that only mom and dad and I can see it. And usually they'll ask for permission, depending on the age of the child. So what fits under this underwear rule, this first point? Using the correct names for genitalia. So open and direct communication, using the correct names for genitalia and other parts of the body, of course, in an age-appropriate manner. Kids need to know that their penis and their vagina are just like their arms and their feet and their ears and their elbow. They're different because they're private and we keep them covered, but they're healthy, good, acceptable body parts nonetheless. So when talking about it, again, age appropriately, use words that don't cause confusion, be specific, and don't use any negative connotations. You know, if you speak of it with a sense of shame or embarrassment, kids are so smart. They'll pick up on it and they'll be like, oh, Tanta Mary's embarrassed. Maybe I should be embarrassed. So, you know, be confident when you're talking about these things. There's no shame. Of course, there's no shame. And we don't want kids to feel shamed or wrong in using these terms. And I know this is tough. I have a lot of friends with children that will have struggled to say these words to their daughters. And I've had to coach them to say these words to their daughters. And it's hard. And they're not bad words when used in the correct context. And, you know, I've got 3 kids between the ages of 7 and 11, right? And my kids know all the words for all their private parts. They know all the words, which is sometimes drives the grandparents crazy, but I don't care. Like, they need to know all the words. So as a social worker, this is really important to me, and I'll tell you why. I've worked with a lot of kids who have been sexually assaulted by adults, unfortunately. And when a child discloses that they've been touched, if they don't have the right words to describe where they've been touched, it can be a problem for many reasons. But what I used to encounter a lot is that, you know, when we go to the legal route and we want to press charges, they say, well, he touched my private part or he touched my chest. You know, they'll say, well, this is your, you know, so it's not clear. It's not specific enough. I mean, there's many other reasons to teach them that name, but for me, it always comes up because of my background. The other thing is that using the right words is important because research shows that knowing the correct anatomical terms enhances kids' body image. And of course we want to enhance their body image, their self-confidence, their openness, and it can help to protect them from being abused. Predators will sometimes target kids who can't talk about their body parts. And why? Like, that sounds kind of funny. So if a predator sees a child using a correct word or term for their body part, they may think, well, this child knows who, you know, knows body safety, knows to talk about their body, knows what an okay or not okay touch is. So that's another layer of protection for children. Another reason for this, and equally as important, is for children not to feel ashamed of their body. You know, when we give body parts different names than what they're called, we're teaching kids that they're part of their body is not okay, like I said that, and we don't want them to feel that way. You know, using accurate names builds up their body images and opens the door for dialogue, for honest dialogue. You know, when you think about it, and I actually was thinking about it with little children, are always like, you know, where's your nose? Where's your finger? Point your finger. You know, when we don't name the private parts, you know, the kids can think to themselves like, well, why aren't they talking about it? Is there something wrong with it? Like, and kids who know the accurate names are more likely to disclose to a trusted adult if they've been abused. And then finally, kids have the right to refuse a kiss or a touch, even from a person they love. And this can be really tough. You know, sometimes kids are confused because they're told, you know, hug Uncle so-and-so or don't hug Uncle so-and-so. This is also really weird with COVID because we're not hugging anymore, but in general, it's tough in our community because we're a community that hugs and kisses, and this is generally okay. So what you can do as a Sunday school servant is by practicing healthy boundaries. So, you know, showing them what healthy boundaries are. For example, if you're greeting your kids in class, you can ask them, how do you want to be greeted? Do you want to hug? Do you want to shake hands? Do you want to fist bump, or you just want to wave, which is no physical contact? I mean, even I guess in COVID times, you could say, do you want to wave or elbow bump? And you're giving them the choice of physical contact or non-physical contact. So there's ways to empower them. Kids should be taught that they can say no, and that when they say no, we respect that. So very important. The second point under the underwear rule is safe touch and unsafe touch. So kids don't always recognize what appropriate and inappropriate touching are. They should be told that it's not okay if someone looks at or touches their private parts or asks them to look at or touch someone else's private parts. You know, the underwear rule helps them recognize an obvious, easy to remember border, underwear or bathing suit. And it also helps adults to start a discussion, because sometimes we just don't know where to start. So this gives you a good place to start. So even what I said before about grooming, most sexual abusers will have an ongoing relationship with kids, and they won't start by touching them in their private areas. They'll start by, you know, back rubs and hugs and things like that. And kids are such literal creatures, and they'll think, you know, I don't like it, but it's not covered by my underwear or where my swimsuit is, so it must be okay. So it's really important to teach kids that any touch that makes them feel, you know, uncomfortable in the least is not okay. Any touch, any space intrusion is not okay. And they should be taught to trust their gut, and talk to any trusted adult about any of these feelings. And this can be very difficult for young children, so it's especially important for young children. And the other part is we have to teach them that their mouth can be a private area too. So I know that you've heard, or you may have heard the phrase good touch, bad touch. And there's a reason why we don't use those terms here. First, as we said before, kids can be confused if they experience positive physical pleasure or arousal. And kids are very concrete. If it feels good to them, they won't necessarily be able to label it as bad. Good and bad in and of themselves are very loaded words. And kids may transfer the thought of badness as a bad touch themselves and assume they've been bad in the process, which can be a complete roadblock to them disclosing. And grooming, we talked about the previous one. All right. So underwear rule number 3, safe versus unsafe secrets. So secrecy is the main tactic of sexual abusers. It's why it's important to teach the difference between safe and unsafe secrets, and to create a climate of confidence. Every secret that makes a child feel anxious or uncomfortable or fearful is not good and should not be kept, and should be told to a trustworthy adult. You know, sometimes sexual abusers will tell kids, don't say anything and this will be our special secret. So secrets are not good. You know, they should be taught that secrets can be harmful and no one should ask them to keep a secret. You know, if you're as a servant, never ask a child to keep a secret. And every parent for me, I teach my kids no secrets whatsoever. Every family's different, but again, kids can be taught the difference, depending on the age, the difference between a good secret, like a surprise. And this difference needs to be made extremely clear to children. Again, so for my kids, no secrets. If I see someone whispering to them, I will jump out and be like, what are you talking about? But they do know that if there's a gift or a party, that they don't have to talk about. Those two, like, they're very specific. So, you know, no secrets, you know, don't ask your Sunday school kids to keep a secret, in other words. So the last part is about trusted adults. So when kids are abused, they feel shame, guilt, and fear, as we said earlier. And we as servants should do our best to avoid creating taboos around sexuality. We should make sure that kids know where they can turn to, who their trusted adult is. And this is something you can work with them, like in Sunday school, again, depending on the age, to identify. I even do this with, I think, any age. You know, who's the person that you can turn to if there's something that you need to talk about, if there's something serious going on, if you need help. It's usually their parent, but unfortunately, it's not always their parent. So it may seem kind of obvious, like, well, of course it's going to be mom and dad. Unfortunately, it's not. So it's important to do this, to say, like, who can you trust? And it should be somebody in the home and outside the home, if possible. And the reason why, because of the statistics we said earlier, a good number of abusers are from inside the family. So it's helpful to have somebody outside the family that they can talk to, whether it's a buna or a servant or a teacher or a coach or whoever. As servants, we should try to be approachable so kids can feel like they can talk to us. You know, when they ask questions, answer it honestly and accurately. So you're sending the message to your Sunday school kids, like, I'm someone you can talk to even when something has happened, which is exactly what you want, what we all want. So recognizing the signs of sexual abuse. Child sex abuse is not always easy to spot. However, with the right knowledge and information, there are some signs and warnings that we can kind of keep our eyes open to. It's helpful to consider these signs, but please remember that just because a sign is present does not definitely mean that a child is being sexually abused. Like, I don't want you to panic when you hear this, or to panic when you hear this. These are just signs that a child may be sexually abused. So the first group of signs is physical signs, and just beware that physical signs are less likely to be seen than behavioral signs. So physical signs may be things like, any kind of sexually transmitted disease. They may have visible sores or bumps around their mouth or in their genital or anal area, bleeding or bruising or swelling in the genital area. So as servants, you won't see this, but if a kid tells you, I have pain down there, that might be, a red flag. Bloody, torn, or stained underclothes. Again, as servants, you won't see this, but if you see it on a retreat, or if a kid says something, that's a sign. Frequent urination or urinary tract infections. So again, you might not see this, but if you've got a younger child in Sunday school going to the bathroom many, many times and saying it hurts when they pee, just something to look into, just to be aware of. Other physical signs are unexplained headaches, chronic headaches that have no other medical explanation, and stomach aches that have no other medical explanation. So there's the physical ones. Again, they're less likely to be seen. So there's behavioral signs. This is stuff that can be seen in either a child or adolescent, so children of all ages. Some signs can be sleep issues, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, or bedwetting is actually somewhat common. Unexplained anger or rebellion, a child who's afraid of a caregiver all of a sudden, who reacts differently when their caregiver touches them, like a trusted caregiver. If they start to react differently, like, just keep an eye out for that. Change of mood, when they're really sullen and quiet, when they're normally, happy and bubbly. Another behavioral sign is inappropriate sexual knowledge or behavior such as excessive masturbation, or like showing their genitals in public. If they have knowledge of sex that they previously didn't have, or seems inappropriate for their age, this can be a warning sign. And this is a pretty telling sign, actually. Sometimes perfection can be a warning sign. Children who have been sexually abused often feel like they're never good enough, so they can react by becoming overachievers and attempting perfection in their life. And then the last one is sudden change in eating habits. The next group is behavior signs more typical in younger children. So the first is regressing to a prior stage of a development. So when an older child starts thumb sucking, again, by itself doesn't necessarily mean anything, but just something to keep an eye out for. If a younger child starts having new names for their private body parts that weren't, learned in school or taught to them by their parents, you don't know where this information is coming from. If a younger child resists taking their clothes off at appropriate times, so if it's bath time or bedtime, they're changing for bed. Again, servants, we may not see this, or we're not going to see this, but if a parent comes to you and says, this happened, you will have the knowledge to know that, okay, I remember hearing about this. This might be an issue. Kids that ask other kids to, behave sexually or play sexual games, that's a big warning sign. Change in bathroom habits unrelated to potty training. So potty training aside, if a child who regresses to having accidents when they're much older and past the potty training phase, that can be a sign. And then finally, when, if they're using like their dolls or stuffed animals and they mimic adult-like sexual behavior when they've never seen it on TV, or, you've never explained it to them, or, they'd have no other knowledge, that's definitely a warning sign. For adolescents, older children specifically, there's some things that are more indicative of them. And some of them include self-harm or self-destructive behavior. They're going through such a tough time and feel awful. Sometimes change in hygiene. Sometimes kids will, they'll dress, they won't shower, or they'll dress kind of baggy clothes. They might do this in an attempt to make themselves feel less desirable to the perpetrator. Use of drugs or alcohol is another one. Unfortunately, trauma is often the root of what we label as bad behavior. And the truth is that kids may be using substances to numb their pain. They don't know how to deal with their pain, so they find ways to cope. Depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, eating disorders are unfortunately common in survivors of sexual abuse. So the list goes on and on. So I'm not going to, it goes on and on. Again, this could be its own talk on its own. And these signs on their own, I want to say it again, don't definitively say that a child's being abused, but it's important as adults in the lives of children to be present and be aware. We are, as adults, we're children's first line of defense in protecting them against sexual abuse. So it's so important. Okay. Hopefully you guys, so this is the last section. So hopefully you guys have followed along. After this, we're gonna open it up to questions. If you have questions, start.
It's in their email. The link is in their email.
The link is in your email, apparently. So the link for questions is in your email. So this is the last point. So feel free to pass questions along. So the last point in keeping children safe is reacting responsibly to abuse. So what do we do? If we know something or we think we know something, what do we do? And this question actually came up a good amount in the Google Forms. So I kind of divided it into 3 parts. Disclosure. Disclosure is when a child tells you that something has happened. So what do you do? So if a child reports abuse to you, the first thing you do is stay calm, listen, and don't ask too many questions. It's a critical time. It's a time when kids will learn if others will stand up for them. So they may not, if they tell an adult doesn't do anything about it, they may not tell anybody else, at least not for a long time. So believe them, tell them that you believe them. Disclosure is often the first step in healing, and it's such a relief for them. Listen calmly, do your best not to overreact, and allow silence. I know silence can be hard for people. I think the therapists on here, you have to learn to be okay with silence because people actually talk when there's silence. You'll get more information than you expect. Praise them for being courageous. Tell them you believe them, like I said. Tell them you're going to be there for them. Encourage them to talk, but not too much. Definitely don't ask leading questions, only if they want to talk. Like if they're offering information, just kind of offer a little bit of encouragement, open-ended, and don't ask them to talk about details because that often will re-traumatize them. Don't ask them to repeat things. So if they said, Uncle so-and-so touched me here, don't ask them to repeat it verbatim because kids, again, are quite literal, like we said before, and they may think oh, she wants me to repeat it. Oh, I must be saying the wrong thing. Oh, I won't say it again, or I'm going to change what I'm saying. So just believe what they say. And finally, try not to show anger towards the offender, which I know can be really hard because as we said at the beginning, most likely than not, this is someone that that child knows and potentially loves because they're kids and they just don't know. And by you showing anger, at this first disclosure, you might actually be adding to the child's burden by showing them how upset you are. So that's what to do. So now steps to take. The first thing you should do is call your state's or your area's child at-risk hotline. So I worked for Child Protective Services in Massachusetts for many years, and you don't need to know the whole story. You don't need to verify that it's true. You're not the investigator. That's the job of Child Protective Services. So if you suspect something, you call. If the child's in immediate danger, let's say they're in a home and you're afraid they're going to be physically injured, call 911, which I just learned is the same number in Canada. So no matter what country you're in, call 911. And then if you need to talk to a professional, a social worker, a doctor, a mental health provider. So that's disclosure. The second is discovery. Discovery is like maybe you've witnessed abuse or you've heard about it from a credible source, or of potential, that something potentially might be happening from another source. So for this, I would say seek support of others to make a solid plan if needed, but report the abuse. Again, like I said before, you don't need to have proof. You just need to have a suspicion that something might be going on. So call Child Protective Services, again, 911 if needed, and talk to a professional. The thing that's different for discovery, if you have discovered, even by accident, child pornography, then you have discovered child sexual abuse and you have to call law enforcement. So remember that child pornography is illegal and is always considered sex abuse. And then finally, suspicion. And this one I think is really tough for some people because there's such a gray line. You know, perhaps you've seen signs or boundaries being crossed. Suspicion does not mean that sexual abuse is definitely happening. It just means that we need to be aware and keep our eyes open. So some things that you can do: you can reach out to a professional, like a doctor, a social worker, a therapist, and discuss your concerns. If you believe you need to report the abuse, then please, by all means, do. You know, I recently attended a lecture on intuition and trusting your gut, and I wish I could tell you all about it because it was so interesting. But suffice it to say that there is a science to trusting your gut. So if your gut says there's something going on, trust your gut. Like, it's not just hocus pocus. There's actually a science to intuition and trusting your gut. And then if you are, you know, suspicious of the abuse, make sure that the child you're concerned about has more than one safe adult they can talk to, like we talked about before, when and if they need to. And I just want to note something here because this question often comes up. Maybe I'm answering a potential question. What about false accusations? What if they're making it up? What if it's not true? And the truth is that false reports are extremely rare. I've read studies that put the range of false reporting somewhere between 2 to 8%. And of that 2 to 8%, the majority of that is between parents who are like in a custody battle or a divorce process. So, I mean, it is really rare to have false reports. Sometimes adults don't report, and, you know, I get it. They don't report sexual abuse because they're worried that they'll be wrong or they'll offend someone. When we do that, we're putting the safety and well-being of a child to the side. So I say, don't think, what if you're wrong? Think about, what if you're right? And have that, you know, decide what you're going to do. We often look the other way, and I think this needs to stop. Children's well-being is a community effort. Like, it's a communal effort. And as servants, we can work together to understand the problem, provide protection for our children, and work together to keep our kids safe. I know that on this call, there are compassionate and courageous servants. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And my hope is that we take time after this to think and reflect and kind of meditate about our role as servants and how we can protect our children. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mary. Angelina, can you please guide us through the question process?
Sure. So if you go through your email, we just sent out a form where you can submit your questions to us. These questions will be fielded by some of our members just to make sure that we're not getting repeat questions, and they'll be forwarded to either Mary or another member who would be equally equipped to answer this question. So we've already, I believe, got some questions submitted already. So
okay, I'm getting the questions right now. Any signs of sexual abuse? So the first question is, any signs of sex? And actually, I encourage all the other team members to jump in if you want to add anything that I'm missing. One thing that I did that I don't know if I emphasized enough is that sexual abuse is never a child's fault, and that they're rarely lying about this. So let's just keep that in mind. The first question is, any signs of sexual abuse to keep an eye out while we're socially distanced and conducting most activities virtually? So I guess it depends on your relationship with the child. So if a lot of these behavioral signs, you can, not all of them, but some of them you can see. If there is a child that's usually bubbly and happy and they're not, you know, keep an eye out for that. And you can, if you're concerned, you can ask questions, you know, ask questions of the parents, ask questions of them to see how they're doing. I'm trying to think if there any other team members want to add to that. Any signs of sexual abuse to keep an eye out for while we're socially distanced and conducting most activities virtually?
I think the only thing would be, as you mentioned, Mary, the change in behavior. If they see something extremely out of the norm, it doesn't have to mean that there's sexual abuse, but it's definitely a flag that we should follow and keep an eye on. Maybe follow up with the parents, find out if there's something different, and that could be a start to the conversation.
Okay. The second question is, if I feel a child has been a victim, but the child doesn't share much, how can I help them, especially if I encourage them to talk, but they don't? So first I want to say, thank you for that question. I can tell just by that question that you really care as a servant and that you want to help the child. So as we said before, if you feel that they may be a victim, what your responsibility is to report it. You don't have to get them to talk. And in fact, if you ask them to talk when they're not ready, it can be traumatizing for a child. So if you feel like something's going on, report it, talk to a professional. When they're ready to talk, they will, and they really should be talking to a professional to help them process the trauma and things like that. So, if they want to talk to you, of course, be there for them. But you don't necessarily have to encourage them to talk. And if you suspect that they may be a victim, you need to report. Okay, and then question number 3, how can we be proactive on teaching kids to speak up at a young age, encourage them to not to be scared or feel uncomfortable? That's also a great question. And I think that goes back to, encouraging openness, talking about body parts, making sure that kids don't feel shamed or embarrassed. And we do that by leading by example. Like we said, when you're talking about these things, talking about body parts, or, even just self-confidence, teaching kids how to be self-confident and finding the kid that is maybe not so self-confident and working with them. It's kind of like an overall thing. If they feel confident in general, they feel, good about themselves in general, and armed with that knowledge of what their body parts are, that nobody should touch me, it's less likely that they will be scared and feel uncomfortable, if that makes sense. And team, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything.
Something you said, Mary, that I think it's very important. If we are not comfortable or intimidated to talk about sex education to begin with, how can we talk about the problem of sexual abuse? So if we're not comfortable to talk to our kids about body parts, educating them based on age appropriateness, before school even starts teaching them, how can we be so in tune to talk about sexual issues in terms of abuse or any kind of neglect? So I think if you know that the topic is intimidating and it's sensitive, get guidance as parents or as servants to be able to know how to start. You need to be comfortable. And our kids are so in tune and sensitive and they're smart. If they know that this topic is so intimidating to us, if they have a problem, they're not coming to us.
Right.
Because they know it's such a taboo, it's such a problem. So I think we need to get out of our shell, and I think there is a lot of cultural issues at play here, and I think some kind of the 1400 years of that oppression in terms of the culture in Egypt, and how it really did a job on us. Even us as priests, and again, we're in the field and we were educated, but knowing that the congregation is having such a reaction. We had a family, San Rebecca's meeting. It's a parenting type of meeting. You could see the eyes and the jaws drop when we start talking about these topics. So we need to encourage, as servants and as parents, encourage this conversation and to find healthy educational ways to talk to our kids first. And when that happens, my kids will feel comfortable to come and talk to me. This is just something I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. The next question has to do with the last point that I made of suspicion. If you're suspicious, should you speak to the child or call Child Protective Services? So I would say, I kind of laid it out there. You should not confront the child and ask them if something's going on unless they disclose. And for the reasons that we said before, is that it can be traumatizing. They might not be ready to talk about it. But if you're suspicious, if you feel like something's going on, just call. If you need to kind of create a team, like if you, let's say it's a kid in your Sunday school class, you might want to talk to the other Sunday school servants and say, like, what have you seen? Talk to Buna, what have you seen? Depending on what you're suspicious of, I guess. There's other adults that have had eyes on these children. We're not serving in a bubble. There's other people around. So talk to people, and then if you feel like you need to report, then report. Again, like I said, you don't need to have any definitive answer to report. And I know that, believe me, I know that Child Protective Services makes people terrified, and they think like, well, I don't want to get CPS involved in this family's lives because then they'll take the kids away. And yes, that happens sometimes, but honestly, and I worked in a really rough area, like the people that screen the reports generally know what they're doing and do a really good job, and they know it's a false report. They know what to investigate more, and there's all these steps involved. So first they'll decide, should we investigate? Then they investigate, and then they decide, should we continue? So there's a lot of steps involved in the whole investigation process. So just because you call doesn't mean that the child's being removed from their home. The next question says, what about inappropriate interactions between two children, how to handle? And that's a very good question, actually, because that happens sometimes depending on, the background of the child. Like if kids who have been perpetrated sometimes do this. So as servants, we're responsible for the safety of our children. So if there's two children that are potentially or acting inappropriate, we're responsible for both of those kids. And I'm assuming those kids are both, young kids in my mind. I don't know if that's what the question is. So, if it's in a retreat scenario, you need to make sure that those kids are apart from each other. Like if it's a Sunday school scenario where, something happened, and if something inappropriate does happen between two kids, you need to let people know. Like you can't just let that go. You need to let people know, because it might, like we said in the warning signs, it might be a symptom of a warning or a warning sign of something going on with that child. That child may be maybe abused themselves, and that's why there's inappropriate things going on. So first thing is make sure those kids are safe and separate, and let somebody know. The next question is,
their guardian, of course. I mean, we're talking about their parents. They have to be the first one to be
and not
informed.
just anybody, their parents.
Yeah. I just know.
Yes. All right. The next question says, should we approach parents about concerns about their child? 100% yes. The only exception I would say, God forbid, if you are concerned that a parent might be perpetrating your child, like that's the only, that I guess depends on the scenario. But if you have concerns that, something is happening to the child from someone at school, a coach, or this or that, whatever, 100% talk to the parents. I mean, as a parent myself, I know that I would 100% want someone to come and talk to me, and then take the necessary steps. So, depending on the scenario, you might have a parent who totally downplays it and says, no, it's fine, we'll deal with it at home. We don't let other people, some family cultures are very closed off. So deal with that wisely. If you feel like something's going on and it's not being dealt with appropriately with the parents, talk to a professional and still take the steps to report. And again, I know it's tough, but if you feel in your gut that there's something going on, that's what I think you should do.
Mary,
Yes.
Mary, it's a one. Can you just comment on the potential of parents themselves being perpetrators?
Like if somebody
to that question, if someone thought that I think the question was asking the parent, right?
Yeah, so it said approach parents about concerns about their child. So if the child is reporting that a parent is the perpetrator, I wouldn't go talk to the parents. I mean, so there's one parent is a perpetrator, if not both, usually just one. There's potential violence going on in that home, like sometimes domestic violence is co-occurring, so you're possibly putting the other parent at risk. So I would talk to someone else. I would talk to, if we're talking about Sunday school servants, I would talk to Abuna. I would talk to other servants, your servant leader, and figure out how to best help that child. Like we're a team, so work together as a team. So if you feel like the parents is not the best way to go because of the circumstances of what they're reporting, talk to the priest, talk to the therapist, talk to the, and you can reach out to us. Like we're available. So yeah, does that answer? Hopefully that answers.
And of course, we would report it, right? We'd file it with the appropriate child protective.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I'm so, yeah. Hopefully at this point that goes without saying, but I will say that you report it. Okay, there's a lot of questions. Let me see. Question says, how to address the fact that perpetrators are usually charismatic and loved by all? How can we make sure that kids know they will not be blamed and they will be believed if they speak out? I mean, education, right? Like what we're doing tonight and what we hope we can do with all these kids is, our hope is that this kind of curriculum will be rolled out to every age group, and kids should and will be taught, hopefully, that it is not their fault. They will not be blamed. If they say something, we will believe you. We can teach them about, perpetrators, but we can teach them about like trust, who to trust. The whole concept of your body is your own is important, because no matter how charismatic a perpetrator is, if they're educated correctly, if they know I shouldn't be touched here, no matter how, kind that person seems, they'll say like, no, like I've been taught, like you cannot touch me there. So the right education, I think, will make a huge difference. And telling them that it is not your fault, instilling that self-confidence in them that they can say no, that their body is their own, is really important. And giving them that confidence will hopefully allow them to be believed if they speak out. And just say it, like if you're teaching this subject, say, if you speak out, we will believe you. It seems funny, but if you say those words and it is a child listening who has been sexually abused, God forbid, they will remember that, and they will say, like if you're just be really clear in saying it. Okay. There's a couple other questions. I'm trying to kind of filter through. How to address the fact that predators don't abuse everyone they come in contact with? I know how to address the fact that predators don't abuse everyone they come in contact with. I mean, they don't. Like I didn't get into this on the talk, but there are things that make some kids more susceptible than others. Like kids that are more quiet or more introverts, or kids that don't have like family support, and kids in different scenarios, like, kids in foster care are more likely to be abused. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's what the question's asking. If you ask that question, if you could kind of, not really getting the question, unless someone else is getting, I don't really get the question. If you can email it again with like a more specific question.
Mary, I think they're trying to say, so like with recent events and people coming forward, one response is, well, I knew this person and they never did anything to me.
Okay.
So they're asking, like, how do you address the fact that an abuser is not necessarily going to abuse every single child they come into contact with, right, but they are still an abuser?
Right. Well, like so it's common that people are, so when people find out, people are often shocked that this person was an abuser, for the reasons that we said before, that they are very manipulative, that they gain people's trust. They can be very charismatic people. So people are often shocked to think like, no, that's not possible. They prey on certain children or certain people and not others. So they know what they're doing. They're very manipulative. I cannot say that word, manipulative. They seek out their prey, sadly to say. So it's not everyone that they're going to be abusing. They're picking certain people, certain children, certain people. And oftentimes we're surprised. This can't be. I know them. They seem so nice, and that's what they do. That's what they do. Right. Oh, that's all the questions I can answer. I'm trying to see, there's a few here that maybe I can pose to the group if the group wants to help me with. There's one question about if church leaders finding out if someone suspects something wrong. So the question says, church leaders finding out if someone suspects wrong behaviors from someone within the church. So I don't know exactly what this question is, what the context is, but I will say that, priests, if you're talking about church leaders like priests, I don't know, Abuna, if you want to answer that question.
Abuna Samuel, would you like to answer that one?
Go ahead, Abuna. I rely on you.
So, Abuna, out of the context of, and again, every state has certain rules and guidelines for clergy in terms of practicing and ministering the sacraments. So it depends how the information comes about. If it comes about in a context of confession, and the state guidelines prohibit the clergyman from revealing any information, then this is going to be the discretion. But for example, if we learn of an abuse that happened to a child by a church member, regardless of who that person is, that this information came to us secondhand from another person who witnessed something, then we report right away. And I think Abuna and I, we had a kind of a similar experience where we learned from a servant about an incident that involved another person, and we followed the protocol of, as mandated reporters, to call. So we called DCF here in Massachusetts. It's called the Department of Children and Family Services. It's the protective agency. In New York, it's called ACS. So it depends on the acronym of the name of that protective agency in your respective states. But then they contact the police right away, and the case gets referred to the district attorney. So this is the protocol if we learn that someone outside of the state laws regarding the sacraments of confession, we have to, as mandated reporter, we have to report and we have to protect the child.
Thank you.
Abuna, did that clear? I don't know if I missed anything from that.
No, I think it's great, Abuna. Thank you.
One more question says, are the abusers always ill, mentally sick? What causes abusers to act? So they're not always, mentally ill. Mentally ill is kind of the wrong name. I mean, there's something not right going on in their life for sure. So there's some sort of mental illness happening. Mentally sick kind of, denotes something different, I think. So there's definitely some sort of mental illness going on, but it's not like, well, they're definitely depressed and they do this, or they definitely have anxiety and they do this, or they're definitely schizophrenic and they do this. It's not like, an equation. There's sometimes trauma in their lives. Sometimes they've been traumatized. Sometimes, there's various reasons. There's no one reason that causes abusers to act out. Unfortunately, I think that there has been research. I'm not actually too familiar with the research on this, so I don't know if any other person on, and if you know, or if anyone knows what the research says about this.
Yeah, I think often there is a trauma history for the perpetrator, him or herself, and oftentimes they themselves are victims of abuse. So that we know that to be one of the common factors.
Mary, I think that was our last question, yes?
And that's it. I'm looking. I think I got to all that I got.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone for asking such wonderful questions. I know that there are some questions that we did not get to today, and that is because they are not exactly relevant to tonight's topic, but they are relevant to a future lecture. And again, just to confirm, this series on safety is the first of many series. So this is just the first topic. So with that being said, I want to thank all of you. And Abuna, can you please pray for us? And sorry, one more thing. We just emailed everyone an exit survey. We would love it if everyone could please respond to this exit survey, because it will help us. It will help inform our future talks. Okay, we like to learn from what we did, and we want to apply your feedback to our future events. So thank you. Abuna, can you please pray for us?
Sure. Maggie, can you just, before everyone gets off, can we invite the servants also to encourage everyone for the future talks? Do you have the dates with you? I don't have them right in front of me.
Oh, yes. So next Wednesday, October 7th, is a talk on safety for college students and grads. On October 21st, also a Wednesday, we have a talk for parents of younger children. On October 28th, we have a talk for parents of older children, and parents of younger children is K through 6, and parents of older children is 7 through 12. And then last but definitely not least, on November 11th, we have a talk for congregation, the general congregation. And just know that while next Wednesday's talk, which is for college students and grads, will be in English, the last 3 talks, parents of younger children, parents of older children, and congregation, will be in Arabic and English. And we will give you more instructions on how that will be done coming up. Okay.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Maggie. Abuna, you want to pray? Or?
اتفضل Abuna, you started. Please
absolve me, and all the fathers on the call, please absolve me.
We got absolve.
In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We praise and glorify your holy name, Lord. And we lift up our hearts to you, Lord. And we seek your grace, and we seek your guidance in every step that we take. We ask, Lord, to bless and protect your children, and help, Lord, that this service and all the services may be for the glory of your holy name. Through the intercessions of the Holy Faithful Saint Mary, Saint Mark, and through the blessing of the feast of the Holy Cross, we ask, Lord, to make us all worthy to pray thankfully, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, amen. The love of God the Father, grace, only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, the communion and the gift of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace. The peace, Lord, be with you. Thank
and
you,
also
everyone.
with your spirit.
Thank you.
Abuna.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Take care, everyone.